Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. It's fantastic to have our campus instructional leadership team here again today to continue our discussion of teaching, learning, and student engagement. Today, we're going to take a step back and we're going to look at some philosophical foundations of education. So we not only understand how our students are learning in the present time, but we take a look back at some foundations of understanding how students learn. And to do that, we're going to take a walk with St. Thomas Aquinas, who dedicated a great deal of his life to teaching and learning and developing the pedagogy and the craft of being a teacher. You have your note catcher in front of you, which has the contents for today's discussion if you'd like to take some notes as we're going along. Let's begin by talking about St. Thomas Aquinas and his philosophy of education. For him and at his time, he believed in the power of experience, that visual sensory experience was the way that we collected all of our data and we took in all of our surroundings and we had to make sense of them. And we made sense of them by reflecting. And through this reflection on what we saw, what we take in, what we experienced around us, we were able to come to a deeper meaning, and we would excite the active intellect that was inside of us and that curiosity for learning. It would also include quite a bit of dialogue and debate, both between the teacher and the student and student to student, and we'll see how that plays into our aspects here a little bit later. Overall, everything for St. Thomas in education and learning was to merge both faith and belief with logic and reason. Those two things had to mix well together to have a true, permanent, and lasting learning and education. So let's talk for a second about the teaching dynamics. In that dynamic between teacher and student, the teacher was the one who would illuminate things and help them to understand what those experiences meant. The teacher would bring signs and clarifications for the student. The teacher was not necessarily the font of all wisdom, that was God. For St. Thomas, he believed in something that we still say today, that the teacher was the guide on the side and not necessarily the sage on the stage. The students had to play an active role in the learning. Also, we had to consider a multitude of viewpoints, both people that agreed with our learning and people who disagreed with our learning. And we'll see how St. Thomas dealt with that in just a little bit here. And all of the learning and this understanding and signs and insights would lead students to connect with abstract concepts, and they would discover, like I'm saying, the true order of things and how one thing's understanding connected to another thing's understanding, and how that played into the overall design of God's creation. As with any philosopher or educated person, there were suspects who doubted him, and there were supporters who backed him up. Many who doubted his works said that he had an over-reliance on nature and experience, and that was just too much of an impact, and that wasn't natural, that wasn't pure wisdom or reasoning. On the other side, people said that he used too much of the philosophical and intellect in his understanding and not enough faith. He applied many of the Aristotelian teachings, and people criticized him for that. Others said, like even much in the 17th century, Rene Descartes said that he had an over-reliance on faith and prayer, and that was obsolete because that didn't apply to everyone. And still others said that scholasticism, which is his dialogue and debate, was just argument for argument's sake. It really served no purpose. But as we can see, St. Thomas has a legacy of learning because over the years, his teachings, his scholasticism, has led to various renewals in neo-scholasticism, and Thomisms has been described for his schools of thought and people who followed him, and that has been through 3 different revivals. So his process is very much tried and true. In the contemporary applications, we can see that we have a press today for things like promoting student dialogue and student engagement. Our kids have to be active in the learning process. Things that we worked so hard on, like Teach Like a Champion and all those different strategies, really stress for us. Remember, the 63 different ways that teachers and students have this dialogue and this interaction, this back and forth, so that they can understand what they're learning and engage with the content. And as we know now, students are taking state accountability tests, and they have to be independent thinkers. They have to come to those conclusions on their own, which is something that St. Thomas would definitely say. It's not the teacher who gives them the intellect or that connection with God, but the student has to come to that realization and discover that wisdom on their own. So in conclusion, we see that St. Thomas and his educational philosophy is still very applicable and relevant today. That we have to have discussion, we have to have engagement, we have to have debate, we have to have analysis, we have to really see what's going on there. And the students have to be able to explain it. We say that when they can explain it, then they understand it. And if they really understand it, then they'll be successful lifelong learners. And what they do will make them to truly become independent thinkers. Thank you for your time, and let's continue with our discussion when we come back from break.